Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the Roland MC-707, from just getting started and set up all the way to advanced production techniques. So before we start making any music with the MC-707, let's take a look at some settings that help us customize the look and feel the way we would like. First, let's look at the overall system settings. To get to this menu, let's hold down Shift and press Knob Assign, and we'll use the Enter button to select System Setting. Now here we have three tabs. Let's take a look at the Control tab. We have a setting for the behavior of the knobs. We also have velocity settings for the pads. If we move over to the Display tab, we have settings for the LCD contrast for the screen and the brightness of the LEDs across the MC-707. Also at the bottom of the Display tab, we can turn off the demo mode if we would like, or change the time in which it takes to start. Now there are also some project-specific settings. Let's take a quick look at those. By pressing the Project button and pressing Enter after we've selected Project Settings, we can see we've got some tabs we can check out here as well. I'd like to focus on the color. So here, what we can do is change the color scheme of the pads for different types of functions throughout the machine. Now let's take a look at some track-specific settings. To find this menu, we're going to hold down Shift and press Select under the track we would like to edit. Now under the General tab here, we're able to change the color of the LED behind the fader on each track. Now this is a great way to help visually organize what types of tracks you have across all 8 tracks. So if you want all your drums to be red, it's very easy to look down and know what you're dealing with. All your synths to be blue, however you want it customized, it's up to you. Each project on the MC-707 is comprised of 8 tracks. Now each of these tracks can be one of 4 types of instruments, and within each track, all of the information for your notes, sequences, and your sound are contained within a clip. And if we take a look on the screen, we can see that each track can hold up to 16 clips. Now, these clips can be reorganized and managed in many different ways, including chaining them together to create song structures, or launching them live for a live set if you want to improvise more. And also, what you're able to do is manage groups of clips, either by an entire track, as you can see if you scroll all the way up to the top. I'll highlight an entire track like that, and we've got some settings on the side, which we'll get into more in depth later. Or if I scroll all the way to the right, I can manage entire rows of clips. So if I want to create my own project or a new project on the MC-707, the first thing to do is press the Project button and then cursor over and select New. Once you confirm by pressing the C4 encoder, it will give you an initial project. Now the default setting on an initial project is that track 1 has an initial drum kit on it, and track 2 has an initial tone track. Now, before you get started creating, you might want to change the tempo of your project. To do that, simply press the Tempo button and turn the value encoder up or down, and as you can see on the screen, the BPM is changing. Alternatively, you could hold down the Shift button and use the Tap Tempo function by pressing Enter while holding Shift. And after a few taps, you can see that the tempo is changing. Now to create a new track on the MC-707, what you need to do is press the Select button on an unused track, that is, any track that isn't lit up. So if I press Select, you'll see that you can select from one of 4 different types of instruments. Now that's tone, drum track, drum plus compressor, or a looper track. When you know which type of track you'd like to put on to this channel, simply press Enter, and it will give you an initial type of track. So if you want to replace a track, instead of just creating one from a blank track, you're going to need to delete a current track that's on there. And the way we do that is by managing our track settings actually on the screen over here. So what I can do is cursor up, as I showed previously, to the top of any of my selected tracks. So track 1, you can see it's denoted as a drum track. You see 1D on the top. And on the side here, if I have this all highlighted, I can go down and I can press Delete. It's going to ask me to confirm. And now that track has been deleted. And as you can see, the light is no longer on under the fader. So that's telling me that this is an unused track and it's ready to be set up as a new track however I would like. So just like before, I press the track select button and I can go here on the screen and select tone, drum, drum plus comp, or a looper track. And once I press enter, it is now that type of track. The 16 pads on the bottom behave differently depending on which type of track you're on. If you want to make sure that the pad mode is set to note, what you'll see is that for a tone track, you have a very simple chromatic keyboard laid out here. Also, included in that keyboard are octave switches, up and down, as well as a rest and tie button, which will be used when we do some sequencing. Now, if I was to create a drum track on track 4, what you'll see, again, with the note pad mode turned on, is instead of this chromatic keyboard that we have for a tone track, we have 16 pads for drums, each with its own individual sound. And we'll get into how to program those individually later on. Once you've created something that you want to save, or you've adjusted some settings on a project that's already saved to the SD card, you can save your changes very simply in 2 ways. The first being pressing the project button and moving over to write. Now, if I press enter here, it will take me to a screen where I can rename the project, and I can press enter to try to write it and confirm if I would like. And there's also a shortcut. If you're in the midst of a nice workflow and you don't want to look at too many menus, you can just hold Shift and press the function button to take you immediately to that page where you can rename and write your project to the SD card. To get started working with tones on the MC-707, let's first set up an initial tone. And the way to do that is by pressing select on an unused channel and using the cursor to move over to tone and pressing enter. So this will give us an initial preset sound, which is always just a basic sawtooth wave. Now we can use the chromatic keyboard, always making sure that pad mode is set to note. Now within the MC-707 there are thousands of preset sounds, and to take a look at some of those sounds and load up and preview the ones that we want, while we're selected on our tone track, we just have to press sound. And as you can see, there are different selections on the screen for where we want to load our sound from. Let's take a look at the presets. Now within this menu, we can search by category. Within each category, we have a bank, and within those banks, we have a bunch of tones. Now the different categories range from traditional electronic sounds like synth basses and leads, polysynths, to more effect type of sounds, but as we keep scrolling down, we also have a lot of acoustic style instruments in here to choose from. If we want to preview these sounds using the keyboard, we can do that directly from the menu. For example, if we are on synth poly key and we move over to take a look down, anytime we are selected on one of these presets, we're able to hear it in real time. And once we find a sound that we like, we have to make sure that we press enter. Now that tone is loaded onto this track, and we can start to sequence and record. If we want to use different sound sources for our tone tracks, such as our own samples, we're going to go to the same menu that we did to select a preset. So we're going to press sound, and instead of going to preset, we're going to scroll down to wave file. By pressing enter, we're able to see the directory on our SD card. So I'm going to go ahead and go to a folder here, and just like previewing the presets, if we press function, I'm able to actually hear these samples before I load them into the tone track. So if I wanted to use this sample for an example, I want to make sure I'm on import while I have the sample selected. I'm going to press enter. Now this sound is the core of our tone track, and we can play it on the keyboard. So if I wanted to select a sound that might be a little bit better for, say, a polyphonic style synthesizer, let's take a look at the SD card again. So same thing, we'll press sound, go down to wave file, go to my folder, and I'm going to scroll down. You can always scroll down quicker and scroll around values quicker on the MC-707 by holding down the shift button and then pressing up or down or turning an encoder. Let's take a listen to some of these sounds down here. So I'd like to use this sound. One nice thing that we can do is if we have a sound like this that's a little bit too low in volume, I can open it and edit it first by selecting Edit on the right side, and normalize it if I would like. So I just want to boost this up a tiny bit, just a couple dB. So let's go to -9. And as you can see, the waveform is now looking a lot higher in amplitude. So I'm going to press Enter to load this into our tone track. And now we're able to play it across the keyboard. We've got a nice polyphonic synth sound, all based on just this one sample that I imported from the SD card. To get started sequencing phrases and patterns on the MC-707, there are 3 different types of ways that we can sequence. Now we're going to be using the 16 step sequencer buttons here to decide which steps we want to put our notes into. And this is the first way that we can do this on the 707. So we have no clips created yet, but what's quite interesting is if I start to sequence, well, I have my cursor on a clip over here, it will immediately create a clip. So if I press step number 1, it will start to flash. And this mode, by pressing any of the 16 steps, allows me to take my time and input a note, 2 notes, up to 4 notes per step. And this is really nice because you can take your time building a chord out or just doing a single note. So if I wanted to do something monophonic, just put in 1 note at a time, I can simply select which step I want to program and put the note in. Like so. Every step, just a single note. And if you press a note you don't want, simply press it again and it'll disappear. And you can always do this going back to steps as well. So as you can see, as I press through these steps, it's showing me which notes I programmed. Let's press play and have a listen. If I wanted some of those steps to have a chord on them, it's the exact same thing. I just press the step that I want here and let me program a chord in. So 4 notes. So let's take a listen. So very, very simple. If I ever want to clear out a single step, the way to do that is hold the clear button, press the step. Now it's empty. And we can just rock back and forth pressing these steps if we want to exit out of that step. And you can see that the screen will show the settings for each step and the notes with their velocity, their start time, and many other things we'll explore later on the screen while I have that step selected. Now, if I want to clear out the entire pattern that I've entered, I just hold clear and press the select button on that track. And now we have nothing. So moving on to the second way in which you can sequence, that would be real-time sequencing. So real-time sequencing is giving you the ability to play in real time along with the beat, and it will put those steps in automatically for you. So it's always nice to have a reference for your time while you're doing this. One way you could do that is to lay down a simple drum beat on a drum track. However, there's also a metronome built into the MC-707. So to access the metronome, I'm going to hold Shift and press Tempo. And over on the right side, you can see metronome off. Let's turn that on, and I'm going to press play. So now I can hear a metronome giving me my timing. And what I want to do to start recording in real time is to press the record button up here. So let me play something into the sequencer. So as you can see, whatever I played was immediately put into the step sequencer, and just like before, I can press that step and I can take a look at the information that is in there. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't play perfectly on the beat. A little bit off. Now, what we can do if I wanted to do the same thing, but have that perfectly in time, I want to use the quantize function. So first off, I'm going to press clear and clear out that entire recording. Now, I'll press record to get ready, but I'm also going to turn on quantize. Now, let me press play, and I'll try to play something similar, and it'll be perfectly in time. So as you can hear, that's right on the beat perfectly. One other thing to point out about the quantizer that is really cool is If I clear this out and I'm going to record something unquantized like I did the first time, right? Not very on. What I can do is quantize after the fact. So if I hold Shift and press quantize now, you can see on the screen this clip setting. Now what I'm able to do is turn this up to a certain percentage. So what it's doing is it's quantizing the notes closer to the beat, but not all the way if I don't want that to. So what that means is that I can have more of a human feel to what I'm doing and a little bit more of a groove, but nudge it closer to the perfect beat. And that will give you a lot more different types of feels and different types of grooves in your music. The third type of sequencing on the MC-707 for tone tracks is step recording. And step recording is pretty much exactly like the original SH-101 style sequencer input from the 80s. And the nice thing about that is that you can put in notes one step at a time, sequentially, but not having to worry about if you're playing them perfectly in time or anything like that. So I'm going to use the note pads down here, the chromatic keyboard, and the rest and tie pad to enter in notes one at a time sequentially. So first I'm going to hold down record, and I'm going to press the first step that I want to start inputting a note into. So step one, now it's just waiting for me to start entering notes and rests. First note, now it's on step two. I'm going to put in a rest, some more notes, maybe a chord. So now I've filled up all 16 steps on the sequencer, so I can press play and have a listen. So it's a really easy way to get ideas in, especially when you're sitting and playing around with the keyboard. So if I didn't have a sound already, or if I didn't have a sequence already, and I'm getting a groove together in my head, I can simply enter step recording, and put it in. Very easy. So when dealing with different types of tone sequencing, there are a few settings that make things immediately more creative. We can find some of those settings by going into the measure edit screen. If we hold down Shift and press either of these measure arrow buttons down here, we're going to enter into a screen where we can set a few things that have a really big impact on our programming. The first being step length. And what this is I can set the length of my measure anywhere from 1 step all the way up to 128 steps. So if we're in 4/4, what we're looking at is anywhere from a single note or 1 bar all the way up to 128 steps, which would be 8 bars. Also, a very powerful way to extend and get longer sequences of slower moving type of sounds is the scale function. Now I'm just going to lay down a 4/4 drum beat just to have a reference for this function. Just so we can kind of hear how we're going to be changing it. So if I change that scale function to 1/8, essentially that is the count for this measure. So it's only going to be moving at 1/8 instead of 1/16. So let's take a listen. It'll be half time. And as I adjust this, you can see we can go faster. We can also move in triplets. And these types of settings are very important when you want to do different types of feels, like different types of time signatures and things like that. Also, we've got a direction. So mode here will let us move forward, backwards, forward and backwards, or a little invert, step 1 forward, 1 back, 2 forward, 1 back, or completely random. And the final setting is for shuffle. Now this is going to be available for each clip independently, and I can change that here. So you can see adding quite a bit more shuffle, and you can also move in a negative direction, which allows you to kind of anticipate the beat a little bit more instead of having the swing that would be part of the shuffle. If we enter into the individual steps to take a look at their settings by holding Shift and any of the steps. There's a few extra tools in here that can really help us work with material we've already started with and then expand it into something new. So basically, first off, in this screen, you can see 4 parameters, and those are what you've entered into that step so far. So we see what note do I have, we see what velocity, we see the start point, which will allow you to nudge the start point of the note off the beat a little bit, either direction. And then we see the length, so that's essentially your gate time, so the length of each note. Now we can edit these manually, and these are immediately input when we're playing in live. So this will have the exact same type of style of playing that you played in real-time recording, you'll be able to see here. But if we want to edit this afterwards, what we can do is just change any values on here. Some extra layers of editing are available if we press Function, because you can see it's flashing here. Now, what we can do under this menu is shift the notes around, shift the entire sequence around either left and right in terms of the steps or the timing, or up and down in terms of the actual notes and transposing it. So if I press play, we've got our kick drum as a reference. Now let me just move over using these 2 encoders here. Let's move the step shift over. Let's take a little listen first. And I'm going to shift this over 1 step, and we'll hear, I'll press enter to commit it. Now I've shifted it over, and you can see that the sequencer changed. Now we've got a totally different sequence because it's different, it's in a different spot relative to the kick drum. As a matter of fact, I like that sequence quite a bit better. So this is a great tool to get results that you hadn't initially intended upon. And then the other thing we can do here, as I mentioned, is transpose, and that's note shift. So say I wanted to shift this up a couple semitones, press enter to commit it. I've shifted it up. This is a great way to really quickly kind of change the key, or just change where your note is starting from. And these type of tools are extremely important. So there are a couple different ways to enter in notes into a tone track using the pads on the MC-707. We've got preset scales to choose from, as well as a chord designer and preset chords. So let's take a look at how to get there. Normally, as we know, we've got a chromatic keyboard laid out here for our tone track. Now, if we hold Shift and press Note, we'll see on the right side of the menu here, we have the option for scale. And at the moment, we're set to chromatic. But as we move through, you'll see that the pads change from the small keyboard style layout to a general 16 pad layout. However, all these notes are quantized to a specific scale. So let's take a listen. So I could set it to major, minor, major, Dorian, all these different modes. And then as we keep moving down, we've got minor pentatonic, minor blues, bebop minor, harmonic minor. And as we keep going down, we get some even deeper, stranger scales, Romanian minor. This is a great way to come up with new melodic ideas that you might not come up with on your own. Let's put this back to chromatic. One of the other modes for entering notes on a tone track is chord memory. So if we just press chord on pad mode, we've got our chromatic keyboard layout, but if I play some notes, we'll hear that it's different from a normal keyboard. You can hear 2 notes at once. Now, each of these pads is able to hold a different chord, and we're able to design that chord by ourselves. So let's press Shift and Chord, and we see on the screen we've got a new menu wherein we can select any of these 12, 13 pads and change 4 notes and program our own chords. So if I say wanted to build a C major 7 chord, I just want to program each individual note in here, and when I play the pad, we have a nice full chord. Now we can continue designing chords for every single one of these, Maybe I'll make a D minor 7 here with a bit of a different voicing. So just there we have a nice simple chord progression, and what we can do is use this to input those chords into the sequencer without having to play the chords with 4 fingers on the pads. Let's try that real quick. So quantized recording. Let me give myself a little kick drum for reference. And here we go. Let's record. So as you can see, if we drill down to our note, we've input all of those individual notes as a chord, just as if we had recorded it into the sequencer by playing every note on the pad. Now for even further customization of our chords, let's go back to our chord menu by pressing Shift and Chord, and we'll program a couple more chords onto these pads. Now we've already programmed this pad and this pad. Now let's program something on this pad. But this time, we're going to highlight the pad and we're going to press Enter. Now this is entering the Chord Designer menu. So within the Chord Designer menu, you can choose which key you're working within, which scale that key is in as well, and the root of your chord. Let's make an F chord, and then the spread of the chord. So what chord voicing do we want? So here 1, 3, 5, 7 is going to give us a 7th chord based on an F within C major. If I want to change that to a 9, I've got a major 9 chord. Now let me press Enter to load that in. So now I've got 3 chords, 2 that I programmed myself, and the third is an interesting chord I probably wouldn't have come up with on my own. So let me do 2 more of these and then we'll see what we can get in a sequencer. So this third pad, we're going to go ahead and make a chord on G, and let's move to a sustained chord, a sus chord, so 1, 4, 5, 7. We can preview it by pressing Function, and then we can load it if we're happy. Let's load that in. And then I want a minor chord on A because we are in C major. So let's pick this last pad here. And I'm going to change our root to A. And the spread will go back to a standard minor 7th chord. Let's hear it. Excellent. Press Enter to load it in. So now we'll go back and we'll create another sequence. Let's make it a little bit longer. 4 measures, and we'll see where we can get. Here we go. So I like that. Let's record it in. So as you can see, it's a great way to get really interesting chord progressions that would be very different from what you would normally do and a lot easier to play live than playing the pads with all 4 fingers. To begin editing tones on the MC-707, first let's select a sound we want to start with. Now I've got a very simple polyphonic sequence going on track 2. And as you can hear, this is just based on an initial tone, which is just a sawtooth. So let's pick a sound that we want to work with. While looking through the different tones available in the presets, remember that you can either be playing the keyboard or running a sequence and you'll be able to preview them in real time. Let's pick this. So now that we've got this sequence running with the tone that we want, let's take a look at how we can start modifying that tone and customizing it a little bit. To get into tone settings for editing, let's hold Shift and press Sound. Now, what you see on the screen now is an overview of pretty much every section of the Zen Core synthesis system, which is the core of the MC-707, as well as many of our flagship keyboard synthesizers. If we take a quick little tour around, there are a lot of places that we can go to edit the sound straight from the core, the oscillators. We can change the filters, modulation, and effects. So let's take a quick look at the oscillator section. The Zen Core system works on 4 partials per tone, and each partial can be looked at as a separate oscillator, but in reality, every partial can have its own settings for almost everything to do with the tone settings. So that's different oscillators, different filters, different modulations, but they do share effects. So if we take a look at the options that we have under the oscillator section, this preset is using PCM wave fat square and PCM wave circular saw. If we take a look at the switch on one of the oscillators, we can turn it off, and let's turn the other one off. To turn this on, let's take a listen to some of the different types of sounds that we can use as the core oscillator. I'm going to go ahead and open up the filter so we can hear this clearly. And I'm going to change from PCM to virtual analog. So if we're looking at the virtual analog section of this, we've got a lot of traditional style analog waveforms to work with, like sawtooth, square, with pulse width. And I should point out that pulse width also works on some unexpected waveforms like saw, triangle, and even sine wave. So you can adjust pulse width and do pulse width modulation on a sine wave. So in this example, let's just treat each of these partials as a different oscillator. So when you're editing from this menu, any change you make on any settings except for those 4 oscillator settings is going to affect every partial. So let's add one more oscillator. Leave it as it is, and take a look at the filter section. So for the filters, you've got cutoff control right here. You've got resonance control here. And envelope depth for your filter envelope. If we press function on any of these screens where the function button is blinking, we're going to see the next level of that page. So what I can see here is things like an additional high pass filter under the filter section. What's the slope of the filter? Is it -24, -18, or -12 dB? So what's the slope? Then I've also got key tracking on the filter. So that is, will the filter cutoff track along with the keyboard to have a nice even tone across my sound? And then the type here is where we can switch between traditional Roland time variable filters to VCFs. And for VCFs, we've got a few different options of modeled filters to choose from, and we can do that over here. So we've got our flat, type JP, type M, and type P, and they all have different flavors. And those flavors really come through when you start to add more resonance. So moving along down the line, like we would in a traditional synthesizer, we've got our oscillators covered, our filter, and then we're hitting our amplifier. So under the amp section, what you're going to find is your ADSR for your VCA. So this is to control your volume. So if I wanted to really tighten things up, just change the release. If I wanted to let it ring out very long, put my release long and make sure that I go up to my filter envelope and also change it in kind. So each partial has 2 LFOs that can be routed to many, many different types of destinations. Now on the basic editing screen, you can see that each of the LFOs has its shape, its rate, and destinations preset here for cutoff and pitch. And then if we go to the next page by pressing function, We have fade time, which is a great way. So essentially, that's a way that the LFO is going to fade in. It's really nice for classic kind of synth pads and when you want a vibrato type sound to come in over time. So not really happening right when you press the key, but fading in. Sync is a way that we can synchronize the rate of the LFO to the BPM of our project. And then amp and pan are two additional destinations. You'll notice if I change sync to on, instead of having rate be a numerical value, what we have is a division of the clock. So this is a great way to make really rhythmic type sounds and moving, evolving kind of sounds that are locked into the beat of our song. There's additionally a pitch envelope that can be routed to any of the oscillators. And then there's structure. Now structure can give you kind of more wild sounds by doing hard sync type sounds, ring modulation, and cross mods. Towards the end of the editing screen, you will see a mixer section, which is where you are able to set the whole level of your tone track, the panning of your tone track, the delay and reverb sends. And I should point out that there's a really handy shortcut for these 4 parameters. Anytime I'm working on something, anywhere I am in terms of looking at the screen, I can hold down the select for any track. And you see on the top of the screen, it shows level, pan, delay send, and reverb send. So remember that for when you're deep in some editing and you want to just change the level or some effects on something very quickly, hold down the select button on that track and you can adjust mix level and you can adjust panning and delay and reverb sends. So let's jump back into the editing screen, and the last thing would be to take a look at the effect. So this little guitar pedal icon on the right is where we can put any one of 90 effects that are inside of the MC-707 onto our tone track. And every track can have its own individual effect, and that's on top of the master effect sends that we have. So just to take a quick look through this, we can change our type of effect here. Right now we've got a space D effect on, but if I wanted this to be a flanger, very easy. I can move through and take a look at some other ones. Overdrive, some different types of distortions, all the way to some really interesting delay effects. Tape echoes, more extreme effects like pitch shifters. And then towards the end, we have multi-effects, which are things like overdrive and distortion into wah, auto wahs, guitar simulators, into choruses, and so on and so forth. If we want to take a look at a bit of the deeper editing available for tone tracks using the Zencore synth system, we have a couple different ways to approach that. So we're still going to start from our editing menu by holding Shift and pressing Sound. And if we take a look up at the top left, we're currently in what we call easy mode. And easy mode means that any changes that I make to the settings on this screen, essentially they will be affecting all 4 partials. Now, we're able to change this mode to partial mode. And what this is a mode where I can make some changes, but only affect a specific partial with those changes. And the way that we decide which partial we're affecting is by pressing one of the 4 C encoders. And we can see along the top of the screen, we're on partial 1 right now, partial 2, 3, and 4. So that is one way to do some great things like apply just a pitch envelope to one oscillator, or apply a different filter to one of the partials from the other. So you could have one partial that has a traditional Roland TVF on it, and then you could have another partial that has a Jupiter with a high-pass filter on it, and start to get some really interesting types of sound design going on very quickly. Alternatively, if we're on any of these sections and we want to access 4 partial programming, what we can do is we can simply press Enter, and it will take us to a deeper type of editing screen. Now, right now I'm on Filter, so if I press Enter, now where we are, we're in partial edit. So this will allow us to take a look at any of the settings that were available, as well as many extra settings, and affect them per partial. For example, if I'm on pitch envelope here, I can just scroll down to partial 2 and increase the pitch envelope just to partial 2. If I want to affect all 4 partials at once, I just need to make sure I scroll up near the top and make sure I press whatever partials I want to be on at that time. And as you can see, I can edit them together. However, it's very interesting that if I lock in one partial to a value and edit them together afterwards, they move in a parallel fashion. So very, very powerful, very specific types of programming available here. So this is true for any of the settings that you see on the screen here. If you look at the structure menu by pressing enter, you can see that there are a lot more in-depth types of settings that you can use for cross modulations and ring modulations, and there are many different menus that we can scroll over to get some very, very in-depth settings. Finally, the modulation matrix allows you to take modulation a bit of a step further than simply sending an envelope or an LFO to the traditional types of destinations like filter, cutoff, and pitch, and amp. So if I open up the mod matrix, what I'm able to do is set a bunch of different types of destinations per partial. So as you can see here, for partial 2, it's pitch LFO 1, and if I was to change that setting to say the decay on my amp envelope, TVA decay, that's now being affected by the same source as partial 1, but it's going to a different destination. So this just opens up so much possibility for very, very deep sound design. So when you think about it, having 4 partials that are able to be polyphonic with different settings on each means that you're essentially able to program massive polyphonic synthesizers on one tone track that have essentially different synthesizers per partial. And the sound design is just almost unlimited at that point in terms of an approach of traditional synthesis. So one of the advanced modulation options on the MC-707 is a very special type of LFO, and we call that the step LFO. So what I have here is a very simple bass sound that's just sustaining for an entire bar. Now let's take a look in our settings, in our tone edit settings, so shift and sound. What I'd like to do is take a look at one of the simple LFOs here. So right now it's set to a triangle, and I'm going to set my sync to on, and let's put it to the cutoff and see what we get. So pretty straightforward triangle LFO, and if I want to change the speed, I just change rate here. If I scroll through the different types of LFO forms, the waveforms, I'll eventually get to step. Now, this is how we get into our step LFO. So what I have to do when I'm on step here is press enter, and we're going to enter in the step LFO editing screen. So essentially what the step LFO is from 1 to 16 steps sequencer of LFO shapes. And by that I mean that every single step can have a different shape of LFO on it. And when we have this running synced, it's essentially like a step sequencer with some really crazy type of capabilities. Now let's just leave this running to the cutoff as it was before. As you can see, we can scroll left and right, and I can see that this is set to cutoff. And we aren't hearing anything because I haven't set up the step LFO yet. So let's take a look. We've got 16 steps, and per step we have different options. So those are curve, depth, and what we can do here is turn up the depth. And you heard that happen. Let's change our speed to 1/8. So what you can hear is that I've only affected one step. Let's go over to step 3 and turn up the depth. Step 6. I'm going to turn 9 depth down. Now we're starting to hear a bit of a rhythmic step sequence happening. So if we go ahead and change the curve of each of these steps, we start to get some extremely advanced types of modulation happening very quickly. And we'll have visual feedback on the editor. So I'm going to go to step 6 and change the curve to this rising sawtooth, and we can hear wop wop every time on step 6. Let's add in a quick 4/4 beat just for more reference. Let's move on and add some more shapes later on down the line. And remember, negative depth will affect the filter in a negative fashion. If we keep moving on, we get sinusoidal type shapes as well. So the step LFO, in addition to being able to affect the cutoff and the pitch of your tone track, can be routed to many different destinations via the modulation matrix, as we looked at in the more advanced tone editing segment. All right, let's take a look at how to get drum kits set up on the MC-707. I'm going to start from a completely blank project and set up a drum track on track 1 just by pressing select. And as you can see, we have the option for drum or drum plus compressor. Now, we'll go into details about the differences later on, but essentially, drum is 16 drum pads with separate sounds on every pad, and drum plus compressor gives you 6 compressors that you can bus different drum parts through to really tighten up your drum mix. We'll take a look at that in more detail later. So I'm going to go ahead and load up a drum track, and it will default to a 909 kit, which is the initial kit for the MC-707. So a different sound on every pad. Now, if you'd like to explore some of the different kits that are available as presets in the MC-707, let's just go ahead, just like a tone track, and we're going to press sound. And same as a tone track, take a look at the presets. So when looking at preset kits, we can play and audition on the pads. If we have a sequence going, it will audition in real time as well. So just taking a look through some of the classic kits that are here, 909, 808, a bunch of genre-specific type of kits as well, EDM kits, trap kits. And we can keep on going down. CR78, there's a ton of different flavors in here. So you're able to pull up a different kit very quickly. Let's go with the 606. Change my tempo a little bit here. Get into electro territory. All right, being that a kit is made up of individual sounds, you're able to choose a different sound per pad as well. So if you'd like to start from one of the preset kits and then start subbing in your own sounds, it's very easy to do. Any sort of editing that happens on a drum track, you can access the menu by holding Shift and Sound, exactly the same as editing a tone track. So what you can see on the screen here is 16 pads laid out, and I'm able to move around to change simple settings on each pad, either by pressing the pad itself, and you can see the highlighted pad changes, or cursing over with the cursor like this. And one important note, if you're doing any of this kind of stuff in a live environment, changing settings, or if you just don't want to hear the sound when you press the pad, simply hold down Note. And as you can see, I'm moving through the pads without actually triggering the sound, and I'm able to move through which pad I'm editing very quickly. So if I want to pull a different sound from the presets to, say, sub in a different kick, or a different hi-hat or something like that, and you can also have any sound on any of the pads. You could have 3 different kicks on a kit if you want. All you need to do is have that pad highlighted and press Enter, and then you'll see this sub-menu where we can do Instrument Select. Now, if we go to Instrument Select, this menu looks almost exactly like the kit preset menu. So we're going to go to preset, but instead of seeing all the kits, what we're seeing is different categories. for individual drum hits. And this is where you can really start to customize your kits and get your own flavors going on. So say this sound that I have now, little rim shot, if I want to sub that out for a different rim shot, maybe an acoustic side stick, I like that, kind of a dirty, distorted rim shot. So I'm going to load that in by pressing enter. Now, as you can hear, we've got our own custom sound on that pad. So now we're ready to start sequencing on our drum track. So similarly to a tone track, for sequencing on a drum track, there are a couple different ways to do it. First, being the traditional TR style step sequencing. So what we want to do to choose which part we want to sequence is simply have that pad highlighted. Again, either by pressing it or holding note and pressing if we don't want to hear the triggered sound in real time. So let's start off with that classic 606 snare. So I'm going to go ahead and put a snare hit on 5 and 13. Let's take a listen. So this differs from a tone track mostly in the sense that when you press a step, it simply puts that pad sound on that step. You don't need to worry about entering in what sound is on what step because every single sound has its own sequencer layer. So if I switch over to the kick, you can see it's blank. So we have a separate sequencer for every one of the 16 pads. So let's put in some kicks. And we can move on, select another sound, hi-hats. So I can keep on doing TR style step sequencing like this, putting it in on every step, or alternatively, I could do real-time recording. Now this works in the exact same way as a tone track. So if I press record and I play in, we're gonna see whatever I play be injected right into the sequencer. And just like a tone track, I had quantize on, and so my timing is perfect. Let me just clear out that hi-hat track that I just recorded by very simply holding clear and pressing that pad. So let's turn quantize off for a sec and really start to feel the clip quantize percentage that we talked about for the tone tracks. It's a little bit more obvious on drum tracks. So let me put in something that doesn't sound very good at all. Really off, right? Now, just like a tone track, what I'm going to do is hold shift and press quantize to bring up my quantize settings. Now remember, I had quantize off when I recorded this. So right here, if we go clip percentage for quantize, as I turn it up, you'll hear it nudging closer and closer to on the beat. Even that's better, but it has a little bit more of that loose kind of feel, which is great for a lot of styles of electronic music, including hip hop. I'm going to leave it like that. Let's just add one more sound before we move on. Let's add a clap, and I'm just going to do this the traditional TR style. Find my clap, and I'm going to put it in here. Let's go ahead and make this beat a little bit more complex by using some of the more advanced sequencing options that we have on drum tracks. First off, just like the tone tracks, when you record something in real time that is playing the pads, it will automatically put the velocity information that you played into that track. So this dirty kind of rim shot that we loaded in, let's first record this over top of our beat in real time with the quantize on. And I'll play some different velocity layers just to kind of prove the point. So as you can hear, it's getting louder because I played harder on every step. So let's turn our record off. And just like a tone track, if I press shift and take a look at a step, or alternatively, just hold down a step for momentary glance at the menu to change something and let go. Either or works. What you're able to see is the actual values per step for velocity. So as I move through, you can see the velocity generally increasing as I go through my bar or my measure. You also have start time, which really is a way to kind of dig deeper into the fact that the MC-707 is not always locked to a grid like a traditional drum machine is. So if I wanted to move that last hit over just to make it late, I'm just gonna nudge it. There we go. So depending on the context of my track, that could be what I want to give it a little bit of a lazy feel. But let's just turn it back down, holding shift to move values quicker always. I'm gonna move over to the clap track, and now I'd like to show you what the mute setting does. Here's our clap track. So what I'd like to do is put a clap right on the 16th step, so just the very last beat of the measure. And you hear that. And if I hold this down, and I'm gonna change this mute percentage. So what this is doing is saying, what percentage of the time will this step actually trigger? So 50-50 is gonna be a real coin toss. So half the time it's gonna play, half the time it's not. Let's take a listen. So there it didn't happen. It happened. So it's gonna be a 50-50. So let me put that back down to 0. So the last option on our step editing screen is the substep. So let me add another snare here so we can hear it nice and clear. So I've got a snare on 15, as you can hear. Pop, pop. And if I hold down this step, I'm going to turn up substep to 1/2. So what we get here is 2 hits on 1 beat. If I turn it to 1/3, you get 3 hits. And then 1/4, you get 4 hits. And then if I keep going, you get a flam. And flams are just like old school drum machines like the 909, for example, where it's not a mathematical division of the beat like a half or a triplet. It's just a nice kind of human feeling, kind of like a drummer hitting a snare with both hands. That's what we get from the flam setting. On drum tracks on the MC-707, there's an alternative pad mode. So when I press the chord button, what we get is note repeat mode. So I'll demonstrate this on the hi-hats. Let me just press play. So if I hold down any pad, any sound, I'll get a naturally repeating in time type of action, which when I hold down the pads, I can change the speed with the buttons here on the sequencer. So if I try that on, say, the open hi-hat, we get some really interesting immediate results because the open hi-hat is, as a matter of fact, on a mute group with the closed hi-hat. So we'll get into mute groups a bit later on in the video. But this note repeat mode is a great way to perform some immediate and very easy type of additions and fills into your drum tracks. So just like on a tone track, there are some interesting types of actions that we can do to change the measure. So if we hold down any step in your entire sequence, it doesn't matter which part you're on, we're going to press shift and press the step to take us to our menu here. And remember, anytime that the function button is flashing, we can press that to expose some sort of extra menu or extra features. So if I press function, what we have is 2 screens here, the first of which should be familiar from the tone track section of this video. And instead of being able to shift your sequence or your measure up and down and left and right, on a drum track, we only want to shift left and right. So what this will allow us to do is change the start point of our actual drum loop. That is, moving all the points on the sequencer left or right. So let's watch as we do this. We can see our kick drum here. So as I'm playing, let's shift everything over 1 step to the right. So I'm going to turn C1 over to +1, and I will press enter, and you'll see it shift over. Now this sounds the exact same, Of course, because it's the same pattern, just shifted over, we just added an extra beat. But when this is in the context of an entire track or an entire groove, those drums will shift against a synth part. And we can just demonstrate that very quickly. If I just draw up a tone track, go to a quick preset, as we've done before. Let's do a SH101 style bass. Perfect. I'm going to do my SH101 style sequencing very quickly, as we did before. And I didn't like that last note, so let's hold it and just change it to a G. And now we have, right? We have a kind of a beat, but if we go and do the same type of action that we did before on our drum track by holding shift, going to a step, pressing function, and let's shift it over an extra 2 steps and see what we have. And this is where you can see as it gets, it'll give you a bit more creative types of nice, happy surprises. Let's shift it over. Right? So the whole groove just changed. Maybe that's something I want to do, maybe that's something I don't. I can keep playing around. And if I want to put it back to where I was, we've moved a total of 3 steps throughout this video. So I'm just going to shift this to -3, press enter, and we're back home. There we go. Also, like a tone track, a very quick way to quantize what you've recorded, different from the clip quantize percentage, is just to quantize to 100%. On our menu here, the note utility, we just take 1 click to the right and we see quantize, and I just press enter. And if I had any unquantized steps, they're now perfectly quantized. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in learning more about the MC-707 and other Roland products, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel.